All right. Greetings, guys. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where everything is connected, and we are covering climate change news of the day. And we have plenty of people in the chats already. Good to see you all. We are also live on Rockfin. Please come over and hang out with us on Rockfin, ROKFIN.com. And without further ado, we have with us today Roger Hallam, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. And where'd you go, Roger? Hold on one second. I lost you a little bit.
Still here.
You know what happened? What had happened was, I'm gonna get you back. Here we go. Somewhere in there. I had you on. I had you ready to bring on, and here we
Well, I
go.
got censored in the first 2
You got
seconds.
there. There it is. Here you go. Okay. Now we should have you on both streams. How you doing, Roger? Good to see you.
I'm good. Yeah. Long day at work, but here.
I imagine
9
so.
o'clock
Right.
in the UK.
Right. It's a little bit late there, I'm sure, for you. We have quite a few viewers in the UK on this channel, so I already saw somebody complaining about the time, that it was too late.
Yeah.
Too late for them. But welcome. Thank you for coming on and having a discussion. We kind of started to talk about a few things beforehand. I always get a little bit, we start having those conversations before the stream is going or the camera's rolling. I'm like, oh, we started getting into some really good stuff. But anyways, first of all, I wanted to. So you became aware of the climate change situation. You were a farmer at one time, yes?
Yeah, I was an organic farmer for 20 years. I've grown food for 30 years, but commercially I've done it for 20 years. Yeah, last year was the first year I didn't do it commercially.
Okay.
But I still have a farm, small farm in Wales.
Okay, so you are still farming now.
Other people do it.
Okay, got you.
My days of weeding have ended.
Right. Okay, got you. Well, I mean, you're a busy person, and you are involved in many other things. So
yeah,
to be sure. And and you ended up studying sociology at King's College. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I got into King's College to do PhD research on. I never quite worked out what it was. It's broadly how to cause trouble was the joke.
Yes.
How to cause trouble effectively, and
was that your thesis, or that was a proposed thesis?
Yeah, it's not finished as is the way with PhDs, but yeah, I've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now, and on about year 3 of it, I did a lot of the strategic work that went into the founding of Extinction Rebellion. I did a paper called Pivoting to the Real Issue in January 2018 to a bunch of activists who were all skeptical about the possibility of creating a movement, a mass movement to engage in civil disobedience over the climate catastrophe. But thankfully I was right, which is always gratifying.
Sure, yeah. Well, you were right. I think you were right. Surprisingly, to a lot of people, because especially in this climate, but even probably more so now than a couple of years ago. It's a difficult climate to get movements going in, and as you I'm sure you know. What do you think led to the success of XR? What do you think were the factors that, or was it just the right time?
It's 9 o'clock at night in the UK, so I'm feeling slightly philosophical. So I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a full-on answer. Okay. I mean, I could give you a nice popular sort of weak answer, but I'm not really that sort of guy.
Yeah, no,
I find it very difficult.
That's all right.
So I'm going to if you're 5 minute sort of summary of the sociology of political change, right?
Got it.
There's basically there's two games in town. There's like structural reasons, and then there's sort of surfacey or cultural reasons or design reasons, right? So the structural reason is because everyone's, not everyone, but a significant proportion of the population is quietly shitting themselves over the prospect of annihilation, and consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously, and that's sort of at a certain point, it's a bit like a volcano. It sort of bubbles up, and at a certain point, it's very difficult to predict. And then it explodes into the public consciousness and into a sort of rebellion-esque episode. And that happens, often in history. Obviously, not with climate change, but often with, the destruction of people's livelihoods and ecological disasters and such like. So that's, obviously that's a given that the situation we're facing is unique in the sense that it's a physical threat and it's getting exponentially worse. Most social contestations, as the euphemism is called, are created by, temporary events. There's a collapse of one harvest or something, or some monarch, overplays his hand, or there's an economic depression. And what's unique about the climate crisis is it's not going away. It's not a little depression.
Right.
It's not, a little dictator. It's not just not going away. It's getting exponentially worse. So that's the fundamental thing I was trying to communicate to these activists is it's exponential. I said it's existential, which is a nice repressed way for saying everyone's going to die, and it's universal, it's affecting the whole of the planet. But the worst thing is it's exponential. And how that translates is into the reality that people can stick their heads in the ground, but it's not going to go away. Then when they stick their heads back out of the ground, it's there again, but just worse. So that's the structural side of it. So, we can't take any credit for that, as you might say. It's there. However, I am of the opinion of the specific time that Extinction Rebellion came along was largely a function of organisation and mobilisation. That's what I specialise in. In other words, it's actually incredibly difficult to create a social movement because, no one really believes it can happen for a start off. And as soon as you start it, everyone piles in there with all their cynicism and ideology and general fucked upness. And it's like...
You can always count on that.
Apart. And, for various reasons, and usually you're sort of dead in the water before you know it. So what Extinction Rebellion did was it basically came up with its own way of operating, which was non-negotiable. And that's really why we succeeded. We were saying, if you don't like it, then go and join Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace. This is what we're doing. We're doing civil disobedience. We're doing focused mobilisation through, village and town hall meetings. We're doing holocratic organisation. We're not having big leaders, but we're not having a chaotic mess either. We've got a regenerative culture where people are required to respect each other. And if you take all these factors together, then you get past the critical mass of going non-linear, as you might say. And that's, you never can guarantee these things, but as far as I was concerned, it was the best bet, and the best bet happened to work and, spread from zero to the most influential movement in the world in 12 months. And obviously now we've got COVID, which is another story, but it's, that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you could say it came out of nowhere, but I actually am of the mind that a lot of people understand how bad the climate change situation is, but they're, internally, they're just not, there's this kind of.
But what I'm trying to say is people can feel as crap as they like about a situation, but that doesn't guarantee an uprising. It doesn't mean a rebellion is going to happen. It doesn't mean a social movement is going to happen. A social movement is a combination of of a social opportunity, as you might say, that lots of people are pissed off, and a mechanism to create direct action or collective action. And that has to be sort of consciously created. And those are the two elements. And that's the challenge, of course, is to create an avenue, a pathway to collective action. Otherwise, everyone's just being miserable in their bed sits, right, waiting to die. That's the problem.
Right. Well, I mean, your impetus, your desire to foster a change, I think, ran into the more widespread understanding that there's a problem, right? It's more widespread than people think or let on.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so you just put it out, you're like, hey, we're in a bad place. And everybody's like, oh yeah, yes, we are. And so I think there is a lot of tinder there, there's already a lot of tinder there. And now probably even more so, even though everything is kind of muted from coronavirus, there's much more tinder now.
Well, as you say, like the fire gets, the tinder is XR, but to extend the analogy, the bonfire, the stack of wood, as you might say, that's ready to burn goes up exponentially each year.
Yeah.
And that's extreme. That's never happened in human history. We've never faced a problem that affects everyone on the planet. Usually a civilization collapses and that's it, right? It's in Central America or it's in, China or something, and the whole of the human race carries on, doesn't it? So, well, never mind,
Right.
China's had it for 100 years and it gets back on its feet. The situation now is, as we all know, that, you have to keep reminding yourself, this affects every aspect of the planet. And we've only got one planet, it's worth remembering. And so it's like the massive end game of humankind. Either we're going to grapple with our own inability to live on the planet, in a harmonious way, or we're going to destroy ourselves. So it's like the final story, as I like to say, of the human race is the climate challenge. It's not as a lot of campaigners and social movement and left-wing people think, that it's not an issue.
Right.
It's not something to be tagged along. It's a fundamental challenge to the whole self-conception of humanity. What we're about.
Sure.
And as such, anyone who says they know what's going to happen doesn't know what they're talking about, because we never hit this sort of problem before. So no one really knows, to be honest. It's quite possible we're all going to keel over and die, but it's also very possible there'll be a massive revolutionary upsurgence in the next 10 years, because at the end of the day, the first instinct of human beings is to survive. And if they can find some collective mechanism to do that, which there's plenty of examples of that, then there will be massive political and social change. And that's obviously what we're betting on.
Yeah, and right, the likelihood of that happening as time goes forward and the situation gets worse, and the economic situation starts collapsing and the climate situation starts collapsing, and there's just going to be a point at which it's just so obvious that we have to go in another direction.
Yes, but as I say, it might well be obvious, but that doesn't mean collective action will happen. This is the main point I'm trying to make, right? Is it will only happen in so much as there's people like myself and thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of other people who provide a clear pathway to collective action. And what I mean by that is mobilization. So there's the methodology that XR has used, and this might sound a little bit boring, but this is basically, as far as I'm concerned, the pathway to our salvation is through thousands and hundreds of thousands of face-to-face talks around the world where people have the science explained to them, and then the effectiveness of civil disobedience or resistance, or whatever word you want to use for it. And thirdly, then a pathway for people to be trained to engage in such activity. So that's the trinity, as it were, of salvation, or whatever word you want to use. But
Right.
will that's the substantial escape route at this point in history. I mean, there's other variations on the theme, obviously. I wouldn't say there's not another way of doing it, but that's how we shot into the public consciousness globally, is basically through those, bringing together those three things. Because, people have been doing science talks for the last, 30 years, right? You go to a science talk, told everything's fucked, and you go home 3 days later, you're just carrying on again because there's
Right.
no alternative, right? The
Right.
basic psychology of humanity is that if you don't give a pathway to act, then people don't change, regardless of how terrible the news is, because they don't know what to do. But people
Right.
do know what to do if you give them a clear direction, and that's what we're about.
Right. So that's the mechanism. I mean, I was going to ask you, how do we convince regular people there's a climate emergency? How do we convince, a large portion of the population that, like, this is real and this is something that we have to act on? And
Well, the question you ask isn't actually the most important question. The question you ask assumes that political change comes about by persuading, the bulk of the population that something should happen. That's not how it works, as far as my studies are concerned. How it works is that a very small number of people basically decide something has to happen, and they go out and persuade a larger number of people, but still a small number, to go into direct confrontation with the state or with society. And those people are primarily motivated by virtue ethics. This is so terrible. I don't want to die knowing I did nothing about it. In other words, they're not motivated by success or outcomes. And that group, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying this is how it works.
right.
And then they go out in confrontation with the ruling class or with the state or with society or whatever you want to call it. And then they get beaten up. They're thrown into prison, they're arrested, sometimes they're killed, depends on the social circumstances. And what that does is then thrusts into the public consciousness the grotesque immorality of what the ruling class or society or the state is doing. And that then brings out the 3.5% of the population, which is statistically the number of people usually needed in a fundamental structural change in society. So that could be, a complete change in the civil rights of Black people in America, for instance, or, women get the vote, or substantial legislation on the climate. That sort of range. It's not just a little thing, but it's not a complete transformation of society. It's like substantial structural change. And through those 3.5% of people coming out onto the street, then that influences the other 90%. Because the other 90% of people are never going to do anything, never did do anything, and never will do anything. Most
Right.
of the human race is not interested in political collective action.
Got it.
And that's the interesting phenomenon that has sort of soaked into people over the last 10 years. Is it's not some sort of abstract process of persuading the public, because what exactly does that mean?
Right.
We're sitting here on this podcast, lots of people might be persuaded by me, but that's not how society changes. It changes through the political confrontation of different groups, and that's the main scenario.
So you can just basically end run around, the massive political, awareness or non-awareness, if you will. Well, that leads me to ask you. So you're working with a new organization, Burning Pink, and
yeah, I've helped set up an anti-political party in the UK called Burning Pink, and the idea of Burning Pink is to engage in direct action against the governments, but also to stand in elections. and standing elections as an act of direct action.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because on the one level, the time that everyone takes notice of you is at elections. So you might as well use the elections as a platform, as it were, for saying, you know, our children are going to die unless we have a transformation of society. So it seems like quite negligent to not stand in elections. But also because what I and other people believe, having looked at the literature, is that we are predicting that in the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be massive dislocations in Western society and obviously across the whole world. And that will open up the potentiality for rapid political change. And we need to be ready for that moment so that we have a progressive revolutionary change rather than fascistic revolutionary change. And that's going to require organization, knowledge, rhetoric, you know, courage, and all those things need an institutional structure. So Burning Pink is, you know, who knows whether it will work or not, but you have to try things. That's really what Burning Pink is basing itself upon.
Yeah. Well, did you form Burning Pink because XR could not do those same things, or was there a different vision with XR, or?
Well, you know, on one level, I don't have a sort of 19th century view of politics, which is, you know, there's one right way and there's one wrong way, and if you're on the wrong way, we'll shoot you type stuff, right? That's really, you know, not only is it barbaric, but it's just not very clever. What I believe in is a social ecology of political change. In other words, there needs to be several different actors in the field, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and they're in what you might call friendly or not so friendly competition. And if you actually look at the details, for instance, of the civil rights movements in the 1960s in America, everyone thinks everyone got on fine. But if you actually look at the history, there was quite a lot of competition between the different organizations. And that was actually productive because it kept people on their toes. You know, if someone wasn't really getting on with the job, then someone else would come along. So as far as I'm concerned, like, you know, I've never been ego-y about XR, although I, you know, helped set it up. It's like, for me, it's a means to an end. I don't care about XR in itself. It's there as a vehicle to save the next generation from horrendous suffering. And to that extent, it's, you know, like any organization, it's not perfect by any means, and it's not going to have the whole picture. So you need other organizations or networks in the frame to do other things. And obviously, Burning Pink's aim is to stand in elections. XR is never going to stand in elections because it's it has a political sort of orientation in that sense. So that's the first reason why Burning Pink should be coming along. I passionately believe, along with a lot of other ecological realists, as it were, is we need to take state power. That's the objective. Nothing's going to change substantially until we have revolutionary parties in power, which of course at this stage again sounds ridiculous, or at least to most people that haven't really studied history. But what history shows is, you know, everything's trundling along, and then suddenly, you know, there's an ecological 9/11, and everything changes all of a sudden. And then afterwards, of course, people say, well, it was obvious. Well, you know, that's hindsight, right? You know, no one saw the First World War coming. You know, most people were in complete denial about Hitler until 1938. No one saw the French Revolution coming. No one saw the Russian Revolution. You know, no one sees revolutions coming. And, you know, what I feel is I think there was a film called The Chicago 7. Have you seen that on Netflix? It's quite entertainmenty, but it shows what happened between 1962 and 1969 in America.
Yeah.
And, you know, in 1962, there was a bunch of middle-class students with ties on and suits, you know, doing Students for Democratic Society stuff. And it was all very reasonable and civilized and middle class. And then in 1969, you had, you know, what's he called, Jerry Hoffman or whatever, doing handstands in front of a state judge on a Vietnam trial, right?
Right.
So what happened in those 7 years was a complete change in the culture of radicalism. And my prediction is over the next 7 years, you're just going to see a complete transformation in the political environment, not least because the young people around the world are hopefully sooner rather than later going to realize, standing outside the school gates is not going to do the job.
Right.
It's going to require classical nonviolent resistance. And, welcome to history. You can see lots of examples of that with Gandhi and Martin Luther King and various episodes in the 20th century. So there's all to play for, right? As far as I'm concerned, which isn't to say I'm naive, but the idea that we're all just going to sit here waiting to die is just not historically credible. Human beings don't actually want to die.
Right.
And if there's a way in which they can survive, and in particular, do something to enable their children to survive, which is probably the most, basic instinct in the human brain, is keep your kids alive, then people will start going to prison by the hundreds and thousands over the next few years, and all the rest of it. Because, I think the whole thing with COVID is just a temporary blip, right, in terms of the social disruption that's coming down the line.
Oh, right.
Once people can get out on the street, it's going to be massive again. And that's, again, not because I'm trying to be ideological or naive or idealistic. It's because of the fundamental non-linearity of the threat we face. Yeah. We all know the stats, don't we? 2 million acres in California burnt down 2 years ago. It was an all-time record. 2 years later, it's 4 million trees, right?
Right.
You can just ramble these stats off, for about an hour.
Sure. Right. Well, and
yeah.
You and I think standing for office is a genius move. It's a good move, as far as just being able to get your, what you want to have happen out there as a policy platform, and or being able to present another reality to people as like, well, yes, in the coming years, the breakdown is going to cause people to go, what do we do? And if nobody's there with, well, here's what we do. We already mapped it out.
The great thing is we sort of know in outline what the revolutionary outcome is of this terrible, situation we're faced with, which is institutionalized, legally binding citizens' assemblies. Because citizens' assemblies, i.e. ordinary citizens selected randomly from the population, they will wake up very quickly, regardless of what they know before they go into the assembly. If someone sits for a fortnight being told this climate science, we know with just about absolute certainty they'll be shitting their pants within 10 minutes, right?
Absolutely.
Because most ordinary people haven't got all the skin in the game of the elites who are still making money out of this death project. So as soon as we can get ordinary people, whatever their cultural or political background, in the room, a bunch of scientists saying, this is the situation, guys, they're going to be going, holy fuck, right, let's transform the economy in 6 months. And that's my prediction of what will happen. Nothing will happen very much. And then everything's going to happen really quickly because the whole situation will change. And that's the positive vision we've got to sell to people. Because the other two visions are we sit at home waiting to die, or we, indulge in some sort of Trumpian, nihilistic, hedonism, right?
Right.
Fuck the future, fuck our kids. All we're going to do is party. And that's a very attractive vision, by the way, which is presumably why 75 million Americans voted for Trump. It's actually very attractive not to look at the bad things in life. And anyone who denies that isn't being honest with themselves.
I also think it's an expression of frustration with the system. The system is not responding to the needs of the people, or responding to, people feel like there's no political recourse. So let's vote for the bomb, let's throw the dynamite in the room, right? Let's go that route. And so.
Yes, I think you're right. As people become more desperate on lots of different levels, then they will hit irrational buttons, as you might say, which can be progressive or fascistic, right?
Sure.
At the end of the day, people will start taking risks, or that small minority of people, the 1 in 1,000, the 1 in 100 people will start taking bigger risks. Right. And it's really a race against time to facilitate the risk taking into a positive, progressive direction. And the big tragedy, I suppose, of progressives is they're still hoping it's going to happen through a reformist mechanism, like what we see at the moment with the Biden administration. And that's totally understandable, but it's totally historically illiterate, because when societies are faced with massive existential threats, then they can only change through revolutionary activity. And I'm not saying that because, I'm being ideological or revolutionary or idealistic. I'm saying that as a social scientist. There's lots of liberal scholars who've said the same thing. They're not radical themselves. They just look at history. And if a society is heading for a massive fall, then you get massive ruptures. And the whole establishment, all the people who are being sensible, turn out to be the losers, because they're basically putting their money on something that's just not going to work. The Biden administration, in not a million years, is going to reduce carbon emissions by 10% a year in the US.
Right.
And as everyone knows, that's only to get us into the region of Paris. But we know Paris is a complete facade because of the carbon lag and global dimming and all the things that they don't consider. Right. So the only way we're going to do this is by a World War II-esque transformation in the economy in 6 months, which is what happened after Pearl Harbor. It can be done, and it will be done. But it will require the removal of the corporate class, and their dominance over politics, because they don't want to see that happen for lots of obvious reasons. So it's going to be an interesting decade, isn't it?
Definitely, absolutely. And interestingly, I think that people who are aware of the climate change situation and maybe other collapse scenarios, the people that have already kind of expected this happening, when coronavirus came along, they were the most mentally and emotionally kind of prepared for it, because they were like, yeah, of course, we knew this was coming. And it was the people that were kind of more tied into normalcy were the ones that were really like, what do we do now? How do I live my life now?
Yes,
we'll never go back to normal.
I think what will happen, a lot of people, when they do social analysis, they go like, will COVID, produce more activism or won't it, right? What's going to happen is both, right? A section of the population will go back to normal with even more enthusiasm, right? They'll go into hedonism and conventionality.
Right.
And at the same time, a proportion of the population, consciously or subconsciously, will realize that the only thing that's going to save us is revolutionary change. They won't be using the word revolutionary. What they'll be saying, to themselves late at night is, we're not going to save ourselves until something massive happens. And they'll be prepared for that. And this is what will shock the elites in the next 2 to 5 to 7 to 10 years, right? Suddenly, the whole thing will change, just as it did, in 1917 or in the French Revolution. People in the elites, all those sensible people, they only talk to themselves. They're not aware of the absolute disillusionment that's out there subliminally in the population. And that's going to be interesting, right?
Well, they're not aware, and they also are aware. I mean, you can kind of see, it's interesting what's happened with the Biden administration. They've come in, and all of a sudden, the censorship on social media has gone up, not down, right? They're liberals. They're supposed to be the left, right? They're supposed to be, for more freedom, right? Freedom of speech or whatever. And what's happened with this Democratic left party, they get into power, and all of a sudden they're like, more censorship. We don't want to hear the voices, the voices of the people. We want to squash down on that. And so
yeah, exactly. I mean, historically, the conflict between reformists and revolutionaries is massively fraught, because they're completely different strategies. And, this is one of the reasons for setting up Burning Pink. And for most of history, revolutionaries are the idiots, right? They're the people who think they're going to change society, and it's obvious it's not,
Right.
I was a revolutionary when I was 18, and by the time I was 20, I was going, there's not a chance,
Right.
because people aren't interested.
Right.
But the situation now is it's the other way around, right? Revolution is inevitable. And the reason it's inevitable with a capital I is because of the geophysics. Like the geophysics is going to produce the breakdown of the social system in the next, 5, 10, 20 years, because you're not going to be able to grow food at 2 degrees centigrade. And we're going to be hitting 2 degrees centigrade in 5, 10, 15 years, aren't we?
Yeah.
So this is just raw physics intruding into politics. And all the conventional political space, and I talk to these people all the time, they're psychotically incapable of understanding nature exists, in the same way as the courtiers at Versailles couldn't comprehend the idea that the peasants would revolt, against the God-given rule of the king before the French Revolution. And this is the extremity of the time we live in, is what's sensible is totally mad, and what's impossible is what's going to happen.
Right.
But don't expect everyone to agree.
Right.
It's lots of people think what I'm talking is total rubbish, but I do happen to be an expert in it. So it doesn't mean I'm right, but it's not like I just made up this on the back of an envelope. That's my job. I study social dynamics, and that's one of the main reasons XR was successful, is because we worked out there was the potential for mass civil disobedience. And everyone else in social movements thought that was a ridiculous idea. I had a nice chat with the chief executive of Greenpeace. He didn't even want to talk about it.
Really?
Because these people don't understand how political change works. They've just had 30 years of reformist professionalization.
Of course, and they're entrenched. Now, kind of, they have their own.
Yeah, and human beings. Once a human being gets to about 50, like, I don't know how old you are, but people get set in their ways, don't they?
Absolutely.
But I think with young people, at the moment, young people are being sold, virtue signaling reformism. But they are going to wake up in the next 2 or 3 years. That's not going to save them.
Right.
Shaking hands with the head of the UN is not going to save the young generation. What's going to save them is millions of people on the street for 3 or 4 weeks. That's how it works.
Right.
And at the moment, of course, it's very difficult to get that message across, because the youth climate movements are largely dominated by middle-class reformism and NGO strategies, and it's not going to work. Well, it hasn't worked. So that's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes.
And what do you think about? Well, so I actually watched your last video, and you were talking about media smears and disinformation. And it's inevitable when you have a movement, any movement, Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, XR, Greta Thunberg, any kind of, as soon as you have some kind of celebrity or momentum, out come the knives and the smears and they're really, tools of the globalists, or they're, you know what I mean? And whatever it is,
yeah.
So, and your video was quite good, and you picked an interesting time to start a YouTube channel, by the way, because YouTube is so, I can tell they're suppressing you all right off the bat. They're just like, no, we're just not gonna. You're an internationally known figure. You should have 100,000 followers already right now, but so. But anyways, so yeah, out come the smears, out come the knives and the conspiracy theorists and all that, and like, how do you stay above that fray?
In left-wing circles, there's a sort of left-wing culture generally is its own worst enemy, right? Because it spends all its time saying how bad the world is, and the subliminal sort of message it gives to itself is therefore it's not going to succeed, right? Which I find really boring and also fairly immoral, given how much suffering is coming down the line. So, my line has always been, okay, so things are shit, but the question is how to change them, right? In so much as they are. changeable, and everything's changeable. It's society, it's not physics. So, as far as I'm concerned, XR generally, new social movements, particularly middle-class social movements, when they appear on the scene, they're quite naive in the sense that, and I was quite naive as well to a certain extent, of thinking, if you talk to a journalist, they won't blatantly lie about you. But it's a little bit of a shock to the system when you realise that they're out to make money at best, and at worst they're out to destroy you, which is fine, right? So most left-wing people go, well, that's terrible, so we just need to be miserable about it. Well, I don't buy that at all. What I think is, well, how do we deal with it? So how we deal with it is we give as good as we get, right?
Yeah.
We're fearless about it, and we go into the public realm and we come back 10 times stronger.
Right.
And make absolutely clear that these people that are spreading lies are facilitating the destruction of the next generation.
Right.
And that's a criminal act, right? That's a criminal act, is to deceive the world about what's coming down the line. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a matter of, good old-fashioned righteous prophetic witness. Right?
Sure.
I don't give a flying fuck, basically, what the media say about me, right?
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm going to go back in, and you need to have a team behind you, and I've got a team that works with me now and with other people, and we're going to develop, public figures in the public realm who will give as good as they get and won't say no for an answer. And then we're not going to be apologizing anymore, right? Yeah. We're going to be saying, this is the situation, get with the program, otherwise you're fucked. And if they, when they disagree, you're just going to say, well, you're complete idiots, which they are, right?
Right.
These people are willfully making money out of deceiving people about the worst crisis in the history of humanity. And there's no greater crime. So, you want to feel sad for these people, if anything, not frightened of them.
Right.
Because they will get their comeuppance,
Sure. Well, and you have to have that fearlessness, because we've already seen, the Bernie Sanders thing in the U.S., where he kind of succumbed to it. He kind of just rolled over and said, well, I don't know, maybe you guys are right, maybe I'm wrong, or I just don't have the fight, and maybe, I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn kind of did that too, right? He was like, I don't know, am I anti-Semitic? I don't know, am I, come on.
I mean, I do understand it if you haven't got support, because it is terrifying to face, an institutionalized machine trying to destroy you. But if you've got a team behind you, at the end of the day, it's about being clear. You don't care whether you succeed or not, right? And that sounds a bit counterintuitive. But the people that change the world, as far as my studies are concerned, don't give a damn, right? That's the most important characteristic you need to have. You need to not give a damn about whether you're going to succeed. You're going into the public realm to tell the truth and to act as if that truth is real. And what will be, will be. And the great paradox of that, of course, is that makes you enormously powerful. Because when you're on an interview, you don't care, right? They can say whatever shit they like about you. You're going to come back and keep making your points because you're right, because you are right. And, that doesn't guarantee you're going to win. But it puts you in the ballpark of winning because people can see your integrity.
Sure.
And there's nothing more obvious than climate, right? It's not a complicated situation anymore. So it's right, really, for, what I would call prophetic witness, which is going in and not giving a damn. And so it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think also with there's an interesting thing happening in the U.S. around coronavirus, that there's been a lot of protests over the last year. You had the Black Lives Matter protests, and then you had some some right-wing protests, some Trump protests, some anti-lockdown protests. To get back to the thing about the Tinder and the degree that people understand that things are not right, that I think the situation, the petri dish, if you will, for something to come together or come to fruition in the next 2 or 3 years, I think is, I don't think we make it through the end of the Biden administration in the U.S. without having some kind of uprising, right? Because I think that their insistence on pushing down what people are trying to say, or the truth tellers, if you will, media,
Yeah.
social people on social media, is just going to have the opposite effect, and people are going to
Yeah, but I think trying to predict the future is a bit of a mug's game in terms of, will it happen this year, will it happen next year? And also, as far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit of avoiding the key issue, right? It's a displacement activity. It's a way of trying to avoid your responsibilities largely by just being analytical. And I see this a lot, on the YouTube and things, people trying to decide what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. That's not the issue. That's not why we've given the gift of life, as you might say. We're here in our lives, as far as I'm concerned, is to live a good life. And what I mean by that is, at this stage in history, our responsibility is to mobilize, right, for the inevitability of social disruption in the next 10 years. I mean, maybe it'll be 20 years, maybe it'll be in 2 months. No one's really sure, because It's a complex system. So the real thing we need to talk about on these shows is how we organize, right? And of course, that's a little bit more tricky and not as sexy, of course, because people love to talk about what might be happening. But we have to start growing up, right? And this is my message to people listening to this. We have to start growing up and realize this is not a spectator sport, right? Your children are going to be starving,
right,
in 10, 20 years' time, or they're going to be shot or raped. This is beyond serious. This isn't a video game, right? It's reality. Los Angeles is going to get evacuated in the next 2 decades.
Sure.
Australia, Sydney is going to have forest fires, which happened last year, every year. I read 2 or 3 science articles a day and have done for 4 years. I know my stuff. I know what's coming down the line. It's going to be hell.
Right.
And we have an absolute moral responsibility to get out of our sort of comfort zones and, conversations about will it, won't it, and get on the street and make clear what our responsibilities are to ourselves and to our society and to the state. And anything less than that, in my book, is complicity with evil. And that's how we will be seen by future generations. Yeah. I mean, in the next 10 years, if we're to believe the science, we're going to throw away the life chances of the next 10,000 generations. Yep. That's a substantial scientific responsibility. So we need to start getting a grip, don't we? Yeah. I can't really put this in 2 strong words.
Right.
We need to get a grip, particularly those people, like many people listening to this, what's happening, right? We all know what's happening. We're not stupid. That's not the issue. The issue is are we going to step up in order to do civil disobedience in 2021?
Right.
And if you want, I'll give you an email, Kevin. So you can email something below your video.
Okay.
Because that's your pathway to action.
Yes. Okay. Please do. Please do.
I got off topic there.
Right. No, that's all right. That's all right. No, that's precisely on topic. I mean, I think we need to. It's organization is key, but it's also going to, as they start to kind of clamp down on people and clamp down on YouTube views and viewers and social media, people are going to have to get real creative around organizing and spreading the word and how do you see this transpiring, like for XR or Burning Pink, beyond maybe standing for office, like as far as organization during the pandemic or in the next year or two, over the next year or two? Like, do you have things in the works, or do you have an idea about how that's going to go?
Again, predicting the future is tricky, isn't it? But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the vaccine is going to start working. And so I think the main scenario is it's still going to be knocking around, right? But it's not going to be producing endless lockdowns. So in so much as people can gather in public places again, then I think there'll be a massive upsurge in social disruption to the extent that we organise it properly. And we've already got the templates about how to organise, and that's my day job, right? When I'm not doing interviews, is I organise people around the world and show them how to do heading for extinction talks and how to be nice to each other and, you know, how to organise civil disobedience and how to talk to the police and all the rest of that. So it's like we already know that we've already got the template for what you might call, you know, optimal civil disobedience disruption. Yeah. So it's really going to be a matter of spreading that as rapidly as possible. But what I want to emphasize is it's very difficult to understand this because you don't really see it that often. But I think we saw it a little bit with Black Lives Matter, and we sort of saw it with the French uprising in 2018. Is disruption is massively powerful as a way of changing society.
Yeah.
And we need to get empowered by that, right? You know, societies don't change at all, and then they suddenly change. And there's reasons for that. And the handmaiden of radical political change is social disruption. And positive social change comes through non-violent social disruption. So that's the challenge, is to channel people's energy into non-violent civil resistance. Right. And you can't underestimate the power of a few thousand people saying no, whatever happens. You know, you saw that with Martin Luther King. You saw it, you know, as soon as 1,000 people are in prison, things will start changing. You know, maybe it's 3,000, maybe it's 5,000, but that's the direction we're going in, and that will start producing the major results one way or another.
Right, right. Well, and it's, you know, and you're right to say, like, it's easy to call this stuff out or talk about it on a YouTube video, but getting uncomfortable and putting yourself out there and getting out in the streets, I think that's it. Or going to jail, as you have done, being willing to be arrested, you know, that's, you know, that's another level for people, right?
You could do your next YouTube video, Kevin, you know, sitting on the freeway of LA and saying, talking to people. You should get in.
Climate change, stop.
I should say, before I forget, that, you know, this isn't all theoretical. If you go onto Facebook and look for Extinction America, Extinction Rebellion America, then those guys are organizing civil disobedience this year, and they're a nice bunch. So that's the thing to do. I mean, there's lots of body groups, obviously, but that's the one I work with.
I'm on the local XR Los Angeles list, and you know, there are varying degrees of energy, you know, around the U.S. I know that in New York it's probably more Extinction Rebellion is more energetic, but you know, it's very hard to get people motivated to do anything in L.A. if it doesn't involve, you know, enjoying yourself, right? So, you know, if you're asking people to be uncomfortable in Los Angeles, you're asking too much, you know, because people are like, what? I don't know, you know.
Never say never. I mean, you know, I go around the world, right? Right, on Zoom, advising groups, and every group will say the same thing. They'll say, oh, Roger, you know, people in Sydney, they're comfortable, they don't want to do anything. It's not true, right? It's not true. There's, again, just, you know, 90% of people in Los Angeles don't give a damn, for the sake of argument. But 1% of people in Los Angeles are shitting themselves. There's no question about that, right? And they will come out on the street when there's major disruption, which requires 1,000 people to go out and be arrested. That's what you're focusing on, is getting those 1,000 people in LA on the go. And that's doable, right? It's a matter of hard work, but it's doable. Sure. And that's the pathway to success. It's not, you know, just Kevin one day and half of Los Angeles the next, right? That's not how it works.
Right. Do you have I know that you're more so focused on organizing and getting the change to happen. But what do you see if somebody asked you, what would the world look like, if we created this positive change? What would the path be? What do you have any ideas about that or thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I forgot to say at the beginning, I always forget, is just in case someone's getting into a bit of a tiz about it. I'm not talking on behalf of Extinction Rebellion, right? I never do, never have, and never will. I'm one of the co-founders, and you've got me on to talk about what I think, and
Yeah.
for better or worse. So what I think will happen or needs to happen or a positive outcome is, again, my view. And XR is not really set up to sort of tell people what they should do. The idea is to set up citizens' assemblies, right?
Right.
And then the citizens' assemblies. So it's profoundly democratic in that sense. It's not like trying to impose a solution. Having said that, I think, broadly speaking, the people in the know what's going to happen and what needs to happen and how it will happen. And that's broadly, there'll be a revolutionary episode in Western societies of varying degrees of severity. And if there's a positive outcome to that, there'll be massive citizens' assemblies, which will then legitimize an emergency transformation of the economy.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean closing down the oil industry in 6 months, transforming the transport system in a year, that sort of thing. And everyone will think it's impossible. But if you read, the model here is what Roosevelt did in 1942 after Pearl Harbor, which is, right. I don't know if you know, but he said to the car industry, you're not going to be producing cars anymore. You're going to be producing tanks. Right. And if you don't, you're going to prison. It wasn't no messing about. The future right. of America is at stake. And of course, the future of America is at stake now, and so is every other country.
Sure.
So what that is going to produce then is a massive frantic dash, right? Similar to what happens in wartime. By that, I mean, I don't mean it's going to be a war. What I mean is there'll be something unique, which is similar to a war, but it's not a war. It's basically a response to the absolute threat of annihilation that the geophysical system's bringing down upon us.
Right.
So I think one side of it will be this massive decarbonisation, and the other side of it will be a mad dash to create geoengineering. And,
Probably.
I'm not an expert in it, so don't ask me what my favourite thing is. Right. Having said that, I talked to a Harvard professor the other day who, half convinced me that if you cover the Sahara and India with mirrors, then you should be able to, halt the warming, or at least
reflecting enough heat back into space.
Substantially, right?
Yeah.
So again, maybe not. But what we need to be clear is we're not over yet, right? For all those doomsday living,
right.
That's really incoherent. Human ingenuity is massively powerful. So saying we're inevitably going to go extinct is ridiculous. But also saying we will inevitably survive is ridiculous as well. We don't know. We're not
right.
gods, but we are innovative. So there's everything to play for, right? And that's why everyone needs to be out in the streets, because every year we leave it, the more likelihood is that we will lose the race against time.
Right.
And then we'll be kicking ourselves big time, won't we? So it's something along those lines, right?
Sure. Yes. I mean, in my mind, I think that we should, we have to kind of get rid of...
People
right.
will do it. I mean, you've just closed down the Western economies in 4 or 5 weeks, right? In order
Sure.
to stop 1% of the population dying. So,
right. Exactly.
This is what human beings do. Don't underestimate human beings. They're
right.
perfectly capable of massive sacrifice when it's something's hitting them in the face. We've
right.
done it, history is full of examples of doing that. So in other words, we'll do whatever is necessary. And of course, what you're alluding to is quite right. There'll have to be a massive reductions in consumption, because consumption is a massive part of the equation. Obviously, there's, just because we've left it too late
mm-hmm.
to do it just by, renewable energy and all the rest of it.
You can't
obviously,
adjust the knobs a little bit.
Energy.
Right.
Obviously that's going to be important. Obviously, Obviously, geoengineering is going to be important, and obviously a massive reduction in consumption is going to be necessary. Those three things in varying degrees will be necessary, but it will be pragmatic. You know, people will reduce consumption to the extent that is necessary in order to win, in the same way as you do in wartime. You know, people in the UK went on rations for 6 years, and those rations were determined by what was necessary in order to keep the country fed, right. You know, in basic foodstuffs, because otherwise we would have starved because of the Nazi U-boats and what have you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this all sounds fantastical, but you know.
Well, no, I mean the response to coronavirus, I thought, was actually a positive sign for climate change, if there ever was one.
Yes.
And that the entire planet mobilized to do something that they thought was a threat, right? You know.
Yeah.
And because you had a organization of messaging on, you know, all the news stations and all the governments were like, this is real, this is bad, and we all have to do something about it.
Yes, right? and the rationale that drives that is everything that we've got, we're going to lose. So, right. You know, the opponents, you know, the business people and big business are going to flip, because they're going to go from, look, we just want to carry on as normal because what you're saying is unrealistic and climate change doesn't happen, to, oh my God, this is going to happen. We're going to lose everything unless we lose 3/4 of what we've got. Right. That's the moment of truth. And there's plenty of people in the business community and the security industries and governmental sectors who understand that now, right? It's either everything goes or 3/4 goes. Well, in that case, we'll go for 3/4, right?
Right.
The option of 100% or 80% is not actually physiologically possible. It's not. The physics won't allow it.
Right.
That's what we're looking at now. And once that becomes clear, then obviously everyone will go for it. You know, like you didn't have a big revolt from, you know, big business when they said you can't produce cars anymore in 1942. Everyone understood the situation. Right. You know, it was like, we don't produce cars and produce tanks, or we produce cars for another year or two, and then invade a whole bunch of fascists and we lose our liberties. Oh, right, okay, we'll produce tanks. You know,
right.
That's you know, it's like we're either going to have coronavirus, overwhelm the hospitals and kill 5% of the population, or we're going to shut down the economy for 5 or 6 weeks and have 1% of people die and be back up and running, right? And those are the two options. There's not some wonder world third option of carrying on as normal.
Right.
And that's why everyone agrees, you know. I mean, obviously, dare I say, America was a little bit of an exception, but I don't want to rub that one in.
Well, I mean, right.
But, you know.
But the thing is, if you have a synergy of messaging, right? You have the media saying this is bad, this is real. I mean, you know, it goes a long way to show what a message will do for, you know, a message on mainstream media will do for people's minds, right? So, good or bad, whether you believe it or not, whether you think it's a good thing or not, if all the media is coordinated to say this is, you know, real, this is bad, and we must do something about it,
yes,
which they've never done for climate change, right?
I don't think you should. I mean, the media is important. Let's establish the media is important, but in my view, the media is not actually that important, and there's lots of evidence to show it's not. What most people are interested in is what's happening outside their window, right? When things are going really badly. In other words, the media can say as much as it likes, but if life is turning really shit, people ignore it. And the big example here is like the Soviet Union. It's this idea of hyper-normalization. I don't know if you've heard of that. But basically, before 1989, all the media in the Soviet Union, by definition, was controlled by the state and saying, you know, communism's great and, you know, everything's hunky-dory. But everyone knew everything was shit. So the media had zero influence, right, on the population, because it was just saying ridiculous things year in, year out. And what happens is, at a time of radical political upheaval, like 1989, the mainstream media that is supporting the system becomes irrelevant because people look out the window and go, oh my God,
Right.
I've just lost my business. I've just
Sure.
lost my kids. And when that happens, people start focusing on what you might call reality rather than the media that they're being produced. So, I'm not saying that people don't get duped by media. Obviously they do. But what we need to understand is people aren't totally stupid, right? When the shit hits the fan, they actually decide to do something about it, and the media becomes a bit irrelevant because they're just singing a song that doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right. Right. Got it. Well, let me get a couple of questions.
Yeah, we've gone over time. You said it was 20 minutes.
Huh? Oh, I don't know. What are we at? Oh, we're at like at about an hour or
We're
so.
having an advertising break.
Oh, is that okay?
Don't we do that?
Yeah, let's just do like one or two questions and I have a couple more questions for you. Or other topics of discussion. However, I didn't see any highlighted questions here, quote unquote highlighted. Somebody asked, who's going to polish all the mirrors in the Sahara Desert? That's funny.
I'll ask him. I'll ask him. I'm going to have another chat with him.
All right.
Yeah.
That's jobs. That's a lot of jobs, polishing the mirrors.
Well, if you want to know, he said it's going to cost £10 trillion, right? $10 trillion, I think, to sort of produce them. But then, of course, you've got to maintain them, right? So
Right.
that's where the polishing comes in. But I mean, this is the problem with all these things, right? Is you can produce a bunch of mirrors, that's fine, but how are you going to produce enough to actually go to the scale you need? That's the big question mark with geoengineering.
Right.
So, but again, it's an irrelevant question because all we know is the longer we leave it, the more exponentially difficult it's going to become. It's a bit like throwing a whole load of marbles on the floor, isn't it? Once you've thrown them all over the place, the longer you leave it, the more exponential it is in terms of how much effort it takes to get back to normal again. And obviously, at some point, you never are going to get back to normal.
Right. Well, and I think if you want to go to maybe another bit of physics or equation, a lot of people feel that the response to climate change, as in building out transforming our energy system to all renewables, or transforming our transit system, or building millions of mirrors, if that would create more add to the destruction that we are already doing to the planet. And so what are your thoughts on that? That bit of the physics part.
Well, as I said, you got me on to become a physics expert, so I don't know. Get someone else on to tell you. But what I can tell you is people will do whatever it takes, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, we could reduce carbon emissions to 0 in 6 months. We'd just be pretty hungry and pretty poor, right?
Yeah.
But people will do that in the eventuality of the alternative being the collapse of everything.
Right.
So that's what people forget. That's my main point. That's the main thing I can say as a sociologist. People will do whatever it takes when they're faced with annihilation, when they know it's actually real. Yeah. And obviously you require a progressive functioning state to do that, which is another question. But in so much as that's there, then it will happen. And the mechanism to produce that functioning rational state is not through the conventional political process anymore. It's through having ordinary people making those decisions, because they'll have the interests of the general population at heart, rather than politicians and all the rest of that.
Right. And I agree with you. I mean, I'm of the firm belief that we will do, whether we like it or not, we will do whatever it takes. Once the realization is in that, we've got a certain amount of time to make some moves, the governments of the world will do, and the people
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean,
world will do whatever it takes
it's not
to to get it done.
it's not inevitable though, as I said, right? It's not inevitable because there is another path, which is Trumpian nihilism, right?
Yeah.
People are perfectly capable of going mad and just living for today. So but there's a degree of agency there, right? Which is the theme of my interview with you. The agency we have is to make sure when this massive awakening happens, then we get a progressive, rational outcome, which is perfectly possible, but it's not inevitable, because history shows that people do have a death wish, as we've seen with Trump, and they will choose death. And
Right.
I'm being perfectly serious about that, right?
Sure.
In the mid-20th century, you can read a lot about this. The Nazi project was really a death project. It was a desire for death on some psychological level. And you can over-exaggerate this, of course, but it's silly not to acknowledge that it is there, right?
Right.
People do choose destruction and nihilism over life and love, and there's good reasons to do that in some ways. So it's up to people of goodwill, as you might say, to make sure that double nightmare doesn't happen. But, that's why it's all hands on deck, as everyone should know.
Right. Right. Well, I'm of the mind that we're gonna, we will do something. I mean, even Trump understands that climate change is real, right? He's building walls around his golf courses. So, as nihilistic as he is, he's still motivated by his own, right? His own security, right? And he's
but like Trump's he's just a starting act, right?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
There's plenty. If you think Trump's bad, then look at history. There's plenty of total more competent lunatics littering.
Oh,
history.
absolutely, right. And that's
who don't even build walls around their golf courses. So let's not delude ourselves on that. But but we've had an interesting. Trump has been an interesting lesson. COVID's been an interesting lesson. In some ways, both of those episodes have been good in the sense that they give us a real sense of what's coming down the line, right? And the biggest problem with climate change is because it's not here, people don't think it's coming. It's a really difficult cognitively for us to understand something when it's not in our face. But what Trump and COVID have shown is this is what a taste of fascism looks like. It's just a little taste, and COVID is a little taste of what the ecological catastrophe looks like. So it's a bit like a vaccine, isn't it? Gives you a little bit of a feel for it, and then your body's able to respond. And that's what the challenge is to get the social body, as you might say, to respond to these two, real life experiences of what's coming down the line.
Right. Well, I mean, interestingly, in the States at least, Trump, people were more concerned with climate change under Trump because he was so obviously doing terrible things to the environment. Right. It was almost like Trump made obvious all the, he was the fascist state with the mask off, and people were, people were like, reeled back in horror. Oh my God. Right. So, but then
I would say the real reason people are waking up to climate change is because it's in their face.
Oh, sure. Right.
This was the traditional problem with climate change, whereas, some scientist says something incredible is coming down the line. Well, it's human nature to be skeptical. But when you've had to evacuate your house like 3 times in 4 years, because of forest fires, then unless you've got a real big psychological problem, you're going to be going, this needs sorting out.
Right.
And once you get, from a social scientific point of view, once 30% of a population believe in reality, then it usually slides up to 80% really quickly. broadly speaking.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So you'll see this big slide, and I think this slide is starting to happen. Well, in some ways, it already has. I mean, it's the same in the UK. You know, something like 30%. Now it's, 60, 70%. The people are very worried about it, depending upon
Sure.
what poll you look at. So you've got that, and that's only going to become more in your face, as it were, as every year that goes by, you get more extreme events. And then sooner or later, there's going to be a really extreme event, which is going to be no food in the supermarkets. And that's when all hell breaks loose, right? Because
Absolutely.
we've seen that with COVID, a little inkling of it, haven't we? With empty shelves and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What do you, is there an obvious disparity in the way the government in England is responding to people's concerns around climate change? I know that the government declared a climate emergency, and they might be taking action or might not be. But what how are they doing? As far as like in the political realm and people's consciousness, like what how do people feel about the response since they declared an emergency? Or have people gone back to sleep? Have people went like, "Whoo, it's an emergency. All right, great. Let's," they've got it covered now. So where do you see that?
No, I mean, obviously, when you say people, you're covering a multitude of sins, right? But I think there's a massive disillusionment with the political class. And this is exacerbated by the realization the political class has betrayed the population on climate change for 30 years, which, of course, is what it has happened. No one really believes the political class is going to actually deal with the extremity of the situation, or at least that's the increasing realization. And that's one of the reasons Extinction Rebellion came along, right? Was because the penny suddenly drops that these people aren't actually up to the job. Carbon emissions have increased by 60%, since how many COP conferences have we had, getting on for 30 of them. Right. It's not going to happen, right? And that's why I'm a revolutionary, right? Not because I'm super radical, but because I understand how history works, which is, when there's an extreme threat to a society, the reformist space, the conventional ruling class, the conventional politicians become incapable of dealing with the situation. And what you need is a big political event. I'm just going to plug in. It won't be a second.
All right. All right. Run a little bit.
Anyway, I think I thought you were going to give me 15 minutes, but you give me an hour and a bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
So I sort of run out of things to say now.
There's
only so many things you can do.
That's all right. I was looking for a question. Somebody asked if you knew when a Blue Ocean event was coming, and I don't. Maybe you want to answer that question. I don't know.
Well, that's a little bit like taking something in a raffle, isn't it? It's like, who knows? But probably the person who asked the question knows no more or less than I do. But
right.
My understanding of the situation is the peer-reviewed papers in 2020 have predicted between 2030 and 2050. And I think quite a lot of people are looking at 2035. The other way of doing it is to get a ruler out and give an estimate of when it gets down to, what was it, one. A Blue Ocean event isn't technically when all the ice has disappeared, is it? But I think if you get a ruler out, it looks like if it's a linear process, which arguably it isn't, then we're looking at 10 to 15 years. Right. But there's plenty of there's plenty of scientists who will tell you it's very likely to be less than that because the ice is spinning a lot faster than the surface of the ice is disappearing. So obviously, if the ice is spinning, then you might, get a year when suddenly half of it all disappears because it's so thin, and you've got Arctic storms and various things like that could create a massive reduction in 1 year. So, yes, but it is a sort of terrifyingly fascinating subject.
Sure.
In so much as you keep your eye on it, don't you?
Well, once we get
It's
to
a
that
bit like,
point, you know, is that enough of a wake up call to you know the massive humanity? Like, oh, we don't
oh,
have
I
any
think
ice in the.
so.
All
I
right, what
think
does that
so.
mean? I don't know. That's got to be bad, right? That's got to be bad. You
I think so. Yeah, 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 yeah. I think there's going to be massive panic, and who knows how that's. As I said, you know, who knows what that will lead to.
well,
But
I'm sorry, I had another question,
yeah,
and I
yeah, go on.
actually kind of wanted to dovetail this question in as well. So, have you heard about the Wall Street bets situation with the GameStop and the Redditors and the people that caused the hedge
Yeah,
funds to lose a bunch of money?
yeah.
What do you think about doing something like you know some kind of financial takedown, organized takedown? Do you see that as a plausible means of protest or
Yeah, I mean, the question isn't that collective action
damage?
works. Collective action always works, right?
Yeah,
There's nothing unusual about that working. I mean, that's what I've been saying for years. Like, that's what I spent most of my life trying to persuade people. Like, we're not powerless. They're only powerless because we don't act together.
right.
So the name of the game is how you produce a mechanism through which people can start to act together. And that's a very difficult social question. And obviously, every now and again, it happens spontaneously. Like, we know when the guy burned himself to death in Tunisia in 2012, you know, you get these trigger events and then everyone suddenly explodes, right? And this event, as I understand it, was largely spontaneous. I mean, I think it was sort of consciously orchestrated to a certain extent. But the name of the game is to create collective action through collective organization. In other words, what we need in that situation is a union of investors. And then the union of investors decides to take out one opponent at one time with all their resources. And that's why labor unions exist, right? In order to collectivize the power of small people against the big people.
Right.
So it's really a function of organization. And as we know, organizing people is very difficult because it costs effort to be organized, and so people resist it. But once you've got organization, then obviously you can take over the world in principle. Right. So that's the challenge. But everyone knows you can take down the financial system. You know, right. It's not difficult. You can take down any power structure through collective action, and history is full of examples of people doing that. Right. The question is how you proactively design it, rather than just waiting to shake a dice one day and get a, black swan event and suddenly something happens. And this is the big question, of course, because in 10 years' time, you're going to run out of rolls of the dice because things are going to be, over the edge. Sure. So that brings us back to people organizing themselves and, communicating and all the rest of it.
Right. Okay, I don't want to keep you too much longer.
One more question then.
One more
question
then. All right.
You can ask are you a communist or something?
Are you communist, social? Are you communist? Are you communist, Roger?
I just want to make that clear for future generations.
Right. Oh wait, I saw. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of questions in here, but hey, someone asked, James Hansen is great. Why don't more groups like XR work with him? Yep.
Well, as it happens, if he's listening, hi, it's James Hansen, isn't it?
Yes.
Hi, I'm going to email him in the next week or two for that very reason. Because one of the interesting things that's happening is there's an organization called Science Rebellion. So check that out if there's any scientists listening. And they've just emailed, I think, 65,000 scientists around the world saying, guys, you're first of all human beings and citizens, and secondly, scientists, right? Being a scientist is not your primary sort of identity. Your primary identity is a citizen and a human being and a father and all the rest of it.
Right.
And what that means is if you have knowledge that this economic system is going to create undescribable suffering for the next generation, you have a moral obligation to go into resistance against that system, because knowledge means responsibility. And if you don't act on that responsibility, then you become complicit. That's just basic ethics. Right. So what Science Rebellion is saying to the scientific community, including James Hansen, and I know James Hansen has stepped up, so he's a cool guy, but is what we need is scientists to stop doing science communications and go to prison.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Yes.
How can you live with yourself, guys?
Right.
How many papers do you need to produce?
How many studies? How many
10,000 papers?
Right.
The information's out there. What comes next is political rebellion. Yeah. And those of you, and they're massively powerful scientists because, they have the information. You can't accuse a scientist of not knowing his stuff because they know their stuff. Right. So if they go to prison and get arrested and all the rest of it, then it's going to have a big effect upon society. So they have an enormous responsibility to engage in collective civil disobedience. And that's coming down the line, I think, with this scientist rebellion. So hopefully James Hansen is going to do the business.
Well,
and
I saw that he just called out Boris Johnson over the Cumbria, I think it's Cumbria mine, which is I thought was good. I thought that was positive. He should probably call out Biden too, or whoever. Call out all.
No, I don't think it is positive. You see,
no.
See, in my scholarly opinion, to the extent that I'm a scholar, is scientists are great at science, but they're politically illiterate on how political change happens, which is no massive criticism. I'm not I'm not a geophysicist, right? I rely upon them, telling me correct information. But what scientists do is they come up with all the correct information, and then they suggest a theory of change, which is illiterate from a scholarly point of view.
Right. And
that theory of change is reformist gradualism. Right. And as a social scientist that specializes in political change, I'm here to say to James Hansen, right, you're good at natural science, I'm good at the social science, right? I did the design for Extinction Rebellion, so I do know something. Doesn't mean I'm God, but you should listen to what I've got to say. And what I've got to say is there's not a chance in hell of Boris Johnson and the Tory government and the British ruling class enacting anything significant on the climate. The only way that it's going to happen is by removing that government and removing that political class. And again, I'm not saying this because I'm a mad radical. It's because they're not going to do it. They're not capable of doing it for lots of structural reasons.
Sure.
So what James Hansen should be doing is not writing, nice letters to Boris Johnson saying, "Oh, we'll all love you if you don't go ahead with this." You
should do better. Do better this time.
What he should be saying to Boris Johnson is, "Guy, with all due respect, Prime Minister, you are engaging in genocide against the next generation, and you'll be in prison in 10 years' time unless you engage in a complete transformation of the British economy over the next 2 or 3 years. Right. Given that you're incapable of doing that, I support a political revolution in the UK, which will remove you from power." Right. And then he'd get 1 million people reading his letter, right?
Go,
because
wow,
people are interested in what's credible. But if you read the letter, it's just classic elite liberal cozying up, right? Thinking that all these people in suits are going to sort it out. They're not. They've run out of time. They've failed for 30 years, and it's not going to happen. Right. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, and they the most that they can talk about is like carbon offsets and et cetera, et cetera.
But it's all bollocks, isn't it? We know it's bollocks. I mean, I read this week that in 2019, solar and wind produced 2% of Britain's energy needs, right? In actuality, 2%. After 30 years of selling renewable energy, it's all fine, it's going to save us. The British establishment has managed to produce 2% of our energy needs from renewables, right? Proper renewables, rather than burning wood and crap stuff like that. That's like obscene. It's an obscene failure.
Yeah.
And these people are incapable of doing the job.
Right.
That's
And
the reality.
they're not going to react quickly enough.
No, and everyone knows, right?
Yeah.
You talk to, I mean, people in the Financial Times know this, right? This is not a radical opinion.
Right.
People in government departments know this.
Right.
People in the security industry know this. Some of the richest entrepreneurs in California know this.
Oh, absolutely. And all the militaries of all the world know everything
The
about
generals know
what's
this.
going on. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a scandal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like child abuse. Everyone knows it's going on, but no
Right.
one wants to talk about it, right?
Right.
But they
Yes, mum's the word, right?
Yeah.
I got one more question for you.
Okay.
If that's okay? Somebody has asked, communism and capitalism do not work. What economic system should we have? I don't know if you.
Well, should we have?
Right.
I think from a structuralist point of view, a certain social structure gives only limited options on what political and economic systems work. So what I mean by that is to try and depoliticize it. And what I mean by that is in a wartime situation or in a time of national emergency or in a time of existential threat to a population, there's only really one thing that ever works. And I'm not making a value judgment about it, right? And what that means and what works is state-based direction of society and politics and the economy. That's what works.
Okay.
And that's what the state does. And I'm not a great fan of the state for those libertarians that might be listening, right?
Sure.
I more than happily, pursue an anarchistic sort of orientation. But that is not a structural possibility at a time of existential threat. And, you can have humanistic sort of versions of it, or, communistic versions of it, or fascistic versions of it. And obviously what we want is a progressive version of it where people are treated with some decency and equality and all the rest of it, all the things we want to see. But at the end of the day, people will have to be forced to reduce their consumption if need be. And there'll probably be popular support for that, but it will have to happen because otherwise we'll be dead. So,
Right.
And that will be enforced by the state. As you've just seen with COVID. COVID
Right,
is
exactly.
a trial run.
I was just about to say that was an organized reaction to a problem.
You see it, right? The state, it doesn't matter that the Tory government believes in the free market. They end up, giving money to 50% of the population in their paycheck, right? Why are they doing that? Because if they don't, people are going to be starving, right? So, reality trumps ideology when it comes to existential threats. So, we could have a nice academic discussion about the pros and cons of capitalism and Marxism and all the rest of it, but it's all reasonably irrelevant at this stage in the game.
Well, and we're going to have to be, if the economy collapses and our society collapses, we're not really going to be able to react to climate change. We're not going to be able to do the things that we're going to have to do.
The alternative is Somalia.
Right.
Is social class and warlordism and
Yeah. And that's not going to be very fun.
Horror, the indescribable horror of collapse of societies, and there's nothing worse. Just go and read about it.
Right.
So again, the race is on to get a progressive state-based transformation.
Yeah. I'm hoping that there's a lot of there are a lot of people out there talking about Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum and Davos, and they're very concerned about this kind of oligarchical totalitarian future. And I know you're running low on time. I don't want to keep you too long, but so there's a big concern about that or pushback against that, but it seems to also include any kind of organized, as you say, state-based response. And
Yeah, yeah.
so
Well,
I think you're right in saying
you
that
know,
a progressive version of that.
I don't want to sound like overly unpleasant, but they're historically relevant at this point in history.
Right.
You know, the days of neoliberal free market, you know, blah blah blah. You know, that's gone.
Or even a libertarian response to climate change, unless we are living in very tribal, feudal, you know, hyper local communities, which, you know, I wouldn't be against necessarily, but how are you going to manage the nuclear reactors, or how are you going to, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, I've been, you know, on the progressive libertarian left all my life, or whatever words you want to use. But that's not what, those options aren't available anymore. If we're going to survive, we need strong states which produce massive transformations, and that seems about as obvious as anything is, as far as I can see. But you know, maybe I'm wrong. maybe you know, maybe physics doesn't exist. You never know. Anyway, I've got to pop off. So
yes. Thank you, Roger. Thank you for giving us this time.
Yeah, so I'll give you that email of people that want to engage in civil disobedience, and it's Extinction Rebellion America, everyone. That's your path to action and self-respect. Look it up on Facebook, I think. I'm not sure whether you get it through Google, but there's a Facebook page, message them, and there's a whole bunch of events coming up where you can listen to scientists and find out about civil disobedience and do your bit in the big race against time.
Thanks so much, Roger. I appreciate you.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
All
Bye.
right. Have a good one. All right, guys. Are we still here? Still going. Thank you, guys, for hanging out for this conversation with Roger Hallam. I kept him way over time. I told him we were going to go 50 minutes, and we ended up going almost an hour and 40 minutes. But anyways, appreciate y'all being here in the chats. Appreciate to the people on Rockfin. Thank you for hanging out. I got a tip on Rockfin. Stonewall Jackwagon. Thank you so much. I like the handle. Stonewall Jackwagon. Thank you for your tip on Rockfin. And Arcadius, I got your tip, your super chat on YouTube. Anyways, guys, I'll be back tomorrow at the regular time, and we're going to talk to Michael Campy about the Thacker Pass lithium mine. Until next time, peace.